Welcome back to the Sampan Viking on China channel. Today I'm going to do a talk which I'm going to entitle China Hits Back, or maybe even China Can Hit Back. And what this means is that I'm going to be looking at the overall strategic position of China in the world. A position which often I think is presented by its friends and by itself as actually weaker than it is, and far weaker than it really is. I think China is in a very strong position in this modern day, and it is operating and forming itself within an environment that very often dates back to the height of the Cold War. The world has changed significantly from then, and a classic example are all the US military bases spread around the Asia Pacific and also in Central Asia, although I think those are pretty much all going to be gone very, very soon. But if you say the Asia Pacific region, these are often cited as being an encirclement of China, able to rain down death, destruction, and unstoppable wrath and retribution on a poor defenseless country. That may have been the case in the 1950s. I would not ascribe that description to China today. I think bases that may have been set up decades ago, when at the height of the Cold War, when China was very, very poor, and even up to the point of the 90s, at the unipolar moment and the years immediately following. I think such bases are today extremely vulnerable for the US. They are now within range of a vast array of Chinese counterstrike measures, and what may have been forward bastions back in the day are now simply highly wide open vulnerable targets that China has already got in its sights and would be amongst the first places to be hit by the Chinese first wave of missiles and airstrikes, etc., etc. So, in short, all that the United States has done has placed a large amount of men and materials into what is the modern equivalent of no man's land, well in the range of the Chinese guns. And as such, the vulnerability that is claimed by China on this, I think, is actually overstated. I would actually switch it around. I think it's the United States that's highly vulnerable, and China actually sits within a large country where it can move around at will and concentrate fire on a number of pinpoints on the map, any hit on which is going to cause significant damage of some sort or another. And of course with Central Asia, the Central Asian bases, and I haven't checked. I know some have gone over the years. Some might still be there. Mainly that put in during the after the Afghan invasion to add some anti-terrorism support to the countries in the region at the time, supposedly. Also to add logistic support to the bases in Afghanistan itself. Well, without Afghanistan anymore, the reason for having these bases no longer really applies. And of course, they are incredibly vulnerable there. They are in the CSTO space, SCO space. These bases can be very easily, physically and electronically and cyber, all the rest of it, isolated and, if necessary, taken over. There'd be very little against the modern militaries of the Asian powers, the Eurasian powers, that small US garrisons in these places, isolated, could really do about it. This isn't going to be like Rorke's Drift in the Zulus holding off vast arrays of running local natives. This would be a small force facing the full weight of modern mechanized armies, with all the support of all the other warfare domains as well. I think it would be over very, very quickly, and if they tried to do anything, easily countered. Often, obviously, anticipated and could be, countered fairly effectively. But I think beyond that, we do look, and indeed, as I've said before, Taiwan is the main flashpoint in Asia Pacific region. Yes, there's been other commentators who have pointed out how America is running a massive destabilization campaign using youth movements throughout the greater Asia Pacific rim, trying to unseat or destabilize governments which are not seen as conducive to US interests. But again, this is playing from a book which is well known by all the major players. And those countries in the region that are friendly with China, you can bet your bottom dollar, or should I say your bottom one, that the Chinese intelligence can be working with these people to help counter the influence and bring these things, to a close, as they successfully did themselves in Hong Kong. And I think we are starting to see that. Other people are pointing out that sort of specially selected angles for photographs and footage it does tend to conceal the fact that the numbers at such protests are now quite small and will probably fitter out on their own accord, possibly helped by introduction of new laws, which is what China did in Hong Kong, which effectively killed this movement dead. But this does lead me on, I think, to what really got me thinking in the first place, is that China may very well look to strengthen its position by a little bit of retaliation against what it sees as a weak spot. And sadly, speaking as a Brit, I think the weak spot is Britain. Um, and this, without taking a political position on Brexit one way or the other, it has, in its reality of its implementation, caused some strategic vulnerabilities that China, Russia, and its allies may very well seek to seek to use. And I can think of now there are probably loads of places you could mention, atolls and isles and all the rest of it, but there are two that really jump out to my mind because they have quite considerable strategic and symbolic value to Britain. Uh, the first one I'm going to look at is the Falklands, which would be a return match. Now, I would say before going further than all of these, this would be China. This is not China looking to extend a physical empire, but simply lending its assistance to aggrieved local states and is able to say we too have been on the receiving end of a British bad faith. The original seizure of Hong Kong in the first place, and then of course the very hostile reaction towards China from the British establishment, culminating in support for the rioters, for the pro-Western rioters in Hong Kong a couple of years ago, which continues to this day. Use of the B&O passport, all the rest of it. That is, if you like, call it a casus belli. That's possibly exaggerating a little bit, but it gives China room to be able to retaliate in kind or in a form which is not dissimilar to how Britain has behaved in the past and indeed in present. Uh, so with the Falklands, all they have to do really is a muscular support of Argentina's claim. Um, if a Chinese fleet appeared in the South Atlantic and coordinated with Argentinian forces to once again occupy the Falkland Islands, this time I don't think the British don't have the naval capacity anymore to try to retake it. They did it by the skin of their teeth last time, simply against the Argentine when the Royal Navy was considerably more stronger than it is today, and against a combined Chinese-Argentinian fleet, it would be hopeless. They wouldn't have a chance. Would the Americans get involved? Well, who knows? But that would be quite an escalation. You would have to put a question mark whether or not they would really want to intervene directly on what was effectively a British colonial possession, especially if they're interested in trying to win a political beauty contest with Argentina and the rest of South America as well, which was a concern that they had back in the day. Um, and because such a thing would have a knock-on effect throughout the continent. So it's always a chance that the United States might want to intervene on that in some way. That would change the dynamic quite considerably, but it would have other consequences, and the Chinese wouldn't necessarily have to get involved in a fight because they're not actually occupying the island. It would be occupied by the claimant Argentina. What no doubt the Chinese would want if they were able to successfully do this is to have a naval base, which would give them power projection into the South Atlantic, and give them ability to protect their interests, their ever-growing interests in Africa, the west coast of Africa, and the east coast of South America. Similar to probably interests that they're also looking to pursue in the Pacific as well. It would be an important facility, especially as it would be sovereign territory of a major country in the South American continent. So that's one to watch. I can definitely see that one happening. The other one, well, that's Gibraltar, and this is potentially a lot more dangerous. This is a major strategic asset in the hands of the British, has been for a couple of 100 years. Spain regards it as their territory. Spain would like it back, pardon me, and if China and Russia were to come along and say, yes, we recognize Spanish sovereignty over this island, we will not recognize sovereignty of a small former colony that is many hundreds of miles away, and an island that's many hundreds of miles away from its territorial borders, and no doubt even fully aware that it was potentially a minefield. I think the Spanish would take that support. And if the Spanish, because they want it back, and if they were to refuse that support, that would be a tacit admission that it's not theirs anymore. So there's a little bit of double jeopardy there for all sides. And if Spain were to take it, that would rather require the EU to support Spain, its member state, as they did in the Basque, not in the Basque region, in Seville, when they had the independence movement there a few years ago around Barcelona. So that undoubtedly would bring the EU into it, and of course the EU is not particularly friendly to Britain at the moment as a consequence of Brexit. Now, this would be quite a dilemma for the United States. So this wouldn't necessarily even have to come to shots being fired. They can just leave a lot of ships floating around, whether or not troops go in on the ground or not, because then one of two things would have to happen. Again, we come to the United States, special relationship, all the rest of it. I've pondered about that, whether they'd get involved to support Britain directly militarily if there was a new emergency in the South Atlantic. It's a question in spades when it comes to Gibraltar and access to the Mediterranean, because they would realize that they are damned if they do and damned if they don't. If the US were to support Britain's holding sovereignty of Gibraltar, that would be a major divide between the EU and the United States. That would effectively split NATO. So at the end of the day, it's not going to be a Chinese possession. Would the Americans simply say, well, it's time to move out, lads, and let the Spanish, who is also a NATO ally, take control? So either China would score a direct retaliatory blow against a colonial possession of the United Kingdom, of Great Britain, or they manage to split NATO. That, I think, is what the Chinese would call win-win. So there we are, just a quick look around, and a rather more optimistic look at China's position than many commentators seem to give. I think that optimism that I espouse is justified. I think China has the might, the reach, the economy in order to affect such things. The way that some people talk, you'd think it was still the 1960s. No, things have changed considerably. China is a very, very powerful nation. It has simply chosen to hide its light under the bushel, bide its time, hide its strength, and only slowly is letting that strength come to the fore. And I think these are the sort of targeted areas where that strength would be demonstrated in spades. Well, that's it. I'm going to finish at that point. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like. If you don't subscribe, please do. It'll help the channel grow, and it's free to do. If you would like other people to watch this and form an opinion, please share. And of course, if you would like to give me the benefit of your opinion, please leave a comment. I'll be only too happy to reply where appropriate. Thank you very much, and I look forward to you joining me all on the next video.